thanks so much for organizing this and for moderating. I know you're going to kind of ask for questions and see who needs to speak, and I really appreciate that. If you'd help to also keep us on time, I'd really appreciate that too, Steve. So my name is Sharon Fleming. As Steve said, I've presented on hypothermia and dressing for immersion with respect to kayaking in a few skills clinics over the last few years. I was a researcher. I'm a professor emeritus at University of California, Berkeley. And I did research and teaching in nutrition metabolism. A lot of my research over 40 some years was on energy metabolism. Of course, not related to hypothermia specifically or to kayaking, but certainly I have a very solid background in the biology of energy metabolism, which is really what our heat production is all about. Really, we produce heat in our bodies when we use energy. And we could really think about the heat that our body produces as being the inefficiency of energy production. So energy utilization in humans and heat production in humans are intricately tied. They're actually metabolically coupled. They cannot be uncoupled. You can't produce energy and use energy without creating heat. Other animals can do that, but we cannot do that. So that kind of gives my credibility scientifically, but I think what's really relevant for this talk is my years of paddling. I was a fairly nervous paddler. I started when I was 60 years old. So I was late coming to the sport. Being that age, I hadn't been as physically active even as I am now because I'd worked a lot. And so I really found getting in the water and being in the water to be a little bit of anxiety provoking. And I got cold easily. So I really kind of focused in on, wow, what am I going to do to stay safe and what's going to be comfortable and how am I not going to get too cold, but also I don't want to get too hot. So a lot of experience I've had over the last 10 to 12 years paddling. And I hope that I can help you folks figure out today what you need for your body, because really, quite frankly, nobody can tell you what you need to be wearing. You are really going to have to figure that out on your own. And what I'm going to try to do today is to give you a lot of ideas and then to encourage you to do a lot of experimentation with yourself to really hone in on exactly, depending on the conditions, what is it that your body needs in order to stay safe and comfortable. Okay, so with that, what I would like to do is to begin first of all, could I get a show of hands, if I could, to this question? How many of you have had a chance to look at the PowerPoint that Steve put posted for you? So more than half, almost everybody has, maybe everybody has. So I don't want to go through the slides in detail. I rather want to do a cursory view of some of the slides, and then I'll stop and ask for questions. I think it's going to be most useful if you let me know what it is that you're wanting more information on, rather than me telling you what you might otherwise read. So Steve, can you go ahead and begin the PowerPoint, please? Could you go to the first slide? Okay, so we're going to be focusing on hypothermia, and more specifically on how can you dress for immersion. And that means dressing for the water temperature. Next slide. So we are warm-blooded animals, which means that our body temperature is going to run somewhere around 98 degrees Fahrenheit. So to get you used to the words that we're going to use, if our body was warmer than that 98 degrees, we would be called hyperthermic. And if our body temperature is lower, we call it hypothermic. So in cold water, we're always concerned about hypothermia. In other words, a reduction in our body temperature. Next slide. So what kinds of temperatures are we talking about? So here on the bottom, you can see our body temperature about 98 degrees. The ocean, the Pacific Ocean outside the gate here runs somewhere between 52 and 57 degrees. The open bay runs somewhere between 51 and 66 degrees, and the delta fluctuates even more at 45 to 77. So you can see that there's not going to be one answer to what is the temperature of. Steve, is there a problem?
Sunday, 4:28 p.m.
Steve, are we okay?
I think somebody might not be muted.
Okay.
Let me see if I can check.
Steve, you can mute them.
I can't do it while I'm sharing the screen.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing for a second. Okay, and let me see if somebody is not muted.
Everybody looks muted on my screen
Yeah,
except me
everybody
and
is-
you.
I don't know where that was coming from. I was muted.
Okay.
So we'll try
Okay,
again.
I thought maybe there was a problem, but it looks like we're okay. So let's continue. Okay, can we go back to the temperature one? The slide before? Okay, so what I was saying here is that with this wide range in temperatures of the water that is around us here in the Bay Area, we really need to find out what temperature the water is if we're going to be able to dress for immersion. And you note that link that's given on the bottom of this slide. And if you go there, you will be able to find out the temperature of water for various locations in the bay. And I found this to be really helpful, especially when I was a new paddler. Okay, next slide, Steve. Next slide. Is that the next slide? There we go. So what I would like to do now is to show this 2-minute video. I don't know if you folks have had a chance to look at it or not, but it's a 2-minute video put together by a professor from the University of Manitoba in Canada. And I found it to be a really, really good summary of what it is we need to be aware of. Could you play that 2-minute video, Steve?
Are you seeing the video?
Yes, but I have no sound.
Is anybody else have sound?
They're muted. They won't be able to tell you.
No, the answer is no. Let me, let's see. Jonathan, do you have any idea why I'm not having sound? I hear it.
You were when we previewed it.
Yeah. Let me try.
No, so you'd have to look at your sound settings.
Yeah, let's try again. Let's.
Okay.
There it is. It's there. You can barely hear it. Steve, you could put on the closed captioning.
Can we start over? Okay. So I'm just going to summarize since the captioning had a lot of errors in it. So basically what this little 2-minute summary was saying is that he's trying to give you a simple way to think about how much time you have and what it's going to be like when you go into really cold water. Now, this was in water of 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, 48 is awfully cold, but don't forget that we can have that temperature in the Delta, and we can even have temperatures of 51, 52 degrees in the bay. So it's not a long ways from the really cold water that we can have in the bay. So his rule is 1, 10, 1. 1 minute to get your breathing under control, because when you go into cold water, you automatically have a cold shock and you can gasp and take in cold water if you don't control your breathing. So 1 minute to get your breathing under control. You have 10 minutes for meaningful muscle movement. That is things like getting out your VHF radio and trying to make a call, or doing a self-rescue, or doing a T-rescue. You have 1 hour before, in that cold water, you would become unconscious, okay? So that's cold water, very cold water, 48 degrees. Clearly, as the water temperature goes up, those numbers shift a bit, but they're a good idea, they're a good rule of thumb to remember. So Steve, before we go on, I wonder if we could take questions. Does anyone have questions so far?
Remember, wave your hands. Dave has one. Dave, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I got a question. I noticed the temperatures in the ocean are warmer than the temperatures in the bay, yet even the the deeper or certain parts of the delta can be colder yet. And why is that?
So when the water is the coldest in the delta is when we have winter or we have winter runoff. Okay, so as the cold water comes down those rivers and it dumps into the upper part of the delta, that water gets much colder.
Okay, that was my logic, but I wasn't sure if I was right there.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you go to the link and look at the temperatures, you can do it by month and you'll see that. Another question? Steve, I'll let you direct the questions.
Yes, the Danishes.
Yeah, hi. My question was, when you have that shock to your breathing, is there a way to kind of get through that? Just
Yes, Eva, there absolutely is. After this talk, Steve is going to send you guys a link to a 30-minute, a long version of that same video, of the video by this same group. And it provides a lot more detail and will really help you with a number of things. And what they show there and what they say there is that the ability of you to expect a cold shock is the number one most important thing. So if you go out in this bay when it's cold and you practice rolling or you do rescues and you jump in the water, all of that gives you experience and helps your body and mind to expect that this is going to be just a cold shock, and you are less likely to panic and go and take in a giant amount of cold water that you're not going to be able to expel easily. So those are the first two things: to expect it, to have experience, so you get experience doing this. And then what that does is, number three, it reduces the anxiety. And so much of this is anxiety. If you have a cold shock and it's the first time, you're really going to be much more likely to panic than if it's the 10th or 100th time that you've experienced it.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another question?
If you don't have your video on and you want to ask a question, you can just hit one of the reaction buttons and the hand or anything come up.
Let's do one more question on this and let's move on.
Okay, so Imasta, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Lisa.
Oh, okay, that's easier.
So this follows up on their question. Can you sort of talk about, I know being an open water swimmer is not going to insulate you, but people stay out in the bay for a very long time while they're swimming. So I'm sort of curious what the intersection, with the bay swimmers with 30, 45 an hour in versus this kind of a hypothermia. Can people get more accustomed to it? Obviously, it's not going to be something, you would depend on, but I'm just curious because.
Yes, Lisa, some other folks sent me emails to that regard as well. So it's a question on other people's minds as well. And yes, there is adaptation that happens, most definitely. But there are a couple of major differences. When you're going out for a long swim in the water, you're calm and relaxed and you anticipate what it's going to be like. You know a certain amount of time you're going to be swimming and then it's going to end. When you take a cold dunking, say, and you're in the bay and now waves are coming and winds are coming and you don't know what's going to happen next and you don't know if anyone's going to rescue you, or maybe you don't know how to self-rescue. There's a lot of anxiety and that really saps energy. Okay.
Can I just interject? There was a question in the chat as what's the water temperature in a pool? So typical recreational pools, the water temperature is between 78 and 82 degrees, not 48. Just so you have a frame of reference.
Yeah. Okay, can we move on then? And we'll take more questions later and some of these same, you hold your question, maybe there'll be time for all of them later. Okay, Steve, can we go back to the presentation, please? Okay, next slide. Okay, so the two main ways that our body has for producing energy or for producing it, for using energy and producing heat is physical work, that is like running, exercising, paddling, and also chemical work. So when we eat food, in order to absorb that food, our body does a lot of chemical work. That chemical work also produces heat. So if we're physically active, we will produce more heat. If we're well fed and absorbing, we are going to also have more heat in our bodies. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, now water makes a difference in terms of the rate at which our body loses heat. So water really speeds up the transfer of heat, and also wind. Wind makes a big difference. And so when we're paddling, we have both of those factors to consider. Next slide. Okay, here what I've done is to break down symptoms of cold exposure, okay? So when we first start being cold, we will feel we will feel a little bit cold. Our extremities will feel cold. And then we will go into things like shivering, and maybe we will not be able to use our muscles quite as well. And then we get into that third set at the bottom there, where we have much more serious conditions. Now, these first two, the first group and the second group, we're not going to be seeing any change in our core temperature at all. We are not at all hypothermic. The third group, we may get many of those without our core temperature even being hypothermic. We still may be normothermic, but certainly as our core temperature goes down, those bottom group of symptoms, they become much more life-threatening, much more serious. Next slide. Okay, so 3 points that we want to stress here. The cold shock we've already talked about. Now then, what we want to focus on is not drowning. So PFDs, they're really, really important. The video stresses PFDs, and in this long version that Steve will send you, it really focuses on the importance of the PFD as well. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that PFD and also about what you should be, what you should have on it or readily available. So the key here is we want to stay alive. You need to stay alive for that first minute during the cold shock when you're adjusting to breathing. You want to stay alive for that 10 minutes when you're still going to have effective muscular movement, and you want to stay alive for that first hour or more, if you're not at really cold temperatures, that first hour or more before you become unconscious. And that's where the PFD comes in. It's absolutely critical. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we have a lot of strategies here for preventing hypothermia, which I think you can take a look at on your own, and we will be talking about as we go through our little show and tell that comes up. So I don't want to go over all of these in detail now. Next slide, Steve. And then there are some factors that increase risks. Again, I'm not going to go over all of them. We'll talk about some of them, but we can take questions on them if you want. Okay, Steve, I think that's all I want to do on the slide. I wonder if we can come back and take questions again.
Sharon, I have a question. Oh, sorry, I don't have my, yeah. What's the paradoxical stripping of clothes about?
It's really the mind getting all messed up. I mean, that's really what it is. The brain is not sensing hot and cold, okay? It's getting confused. Our brain gets confused about a number of things. It gets confused about thirst and hunger. Often we'll think we're hungry and we're thirsty. If we drink a cup of water, we're no longer hungry. Well, that was a hunger signal that we were getting, but it was really the brain getting messed up and sensing this as a hunger signal when it was a thirst signal. We can do the same things with hot and cold, especially once we start lowering our core temperature a little bit. Another question? Steve, can you recognize them?
Hi, I'm more of a sailor. I'm brand new to kayaking. For the PFDs, I assume that it is, a full PFD, no CO2 charged types thing, or are there those types of alternatives as well?
No, those are not recommended at all. We want to have a PFD on that's absolutely ready to go without you doing anything at all. It also provides a lot of insulation for the cold, which is important. Steve, one more.
Looking, anybody else?
Dave, I think, did Dave have his hand up? No.
All right.
Maybe
Remember,
that's it for now.
if your video is off, you can still use the reaction button at the bottom. They'll indicate that you want to talk, or just turn your mic on, start talking.
Okay, then I think I'm going to start with the show and tell, Steve, and then questions can come up as we go. Is that all right?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sharon, do you want me, if people have questions as we go, do you want me to let you know?
Yes, would you please do that?
Okay, and just a time note, we're about at the halfway mark.
Good, great. So here I hope you can see a PFD. And I'm going to leave it hanging here over the whole time because it is the single most important piece of clothing equipment that you can have. You really shouldn't even be going near the water without your PFD on, okay? Walking along a dock, if someone hits you with a paddle, you're going to be in the water. And if they happen to hit you in the head, well, gee whiz, maybe you should have had your PFD on. So it's the thing that you want to have. You want to have one, I think that buckles as well as zips, okay, rather than just zipping, because if the zipper breaks, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. I think on your PFD, you want to have a VHF radio so that you can call for help if you need it, and you need to know how to use it. It should be tethered. You don't want it to go falling in the water if you go in the water. You might also want to have a flare, kind of a strobe light that you can easily get to and put on in case you are in the water a lot longer than you want to be and it's getting dark. This really helps people to see you, rescuers to see you if you have a strobe light going on, off and on your shoulder. Water, hydration is critical. Our metabolism depends on us being well hydrated. So we don't want to get dehydrated. I like to use a camelback that I have tied onto my PFD. It's easy. I get the sippy tube right close. I don't have to stop in wavy conditions and try to get my water bottle detached. You can certainly use just a water bottle as long as it's tethered to your boat, but then you're going to have to stop. You're going to have to put your paddle down and you're going to have to drink. And I found it's a lot easier to get dehydrated with a bottle than it is if you have a camelback that's easy to get to. Okay, so those I think are the key things, except one more, and that is in your PFD, you want a snack. You want some readily accessible food. If you're starting to get cold, even if you're paddling, if you have some food, that's going to stimulate your digestive system and create some heat for your body, and it's going to help to warm you. So be sure you have some food available. And something I learned by bitter experience is something that isn't crumbly. Okay, I had a situation where I had an energy bar and I took some, but I was having to keep paddling. So I was having to keep kind of moving. And I actually ended up inhaling some of those little crumb fragments. And, you know, the last thing you want when you're trying to manage a tippy boat and a lot of waves is to be choking on a piece of granola bar. So I use something that isn't crumbly. I don't have to like it. I just have to eat it, right? That's the key.
We
Just
don't
eat it.
normally teach the Heimlich maneuver as part of the rescues.
That's
All
why
right, Sharon, I have a
Steve.
question.
Yes.
If you've been in the water for 10 minutes and you can't move your muscles, will your PFD keep your head above water?
Yes, it must. You must have a type that does that. Yes.
Actually, the kayaking ones do not. These do not keep your head above
Oh,
water.
if you're unconscious?
Unconscious, yeah.
If you're unconscious, no.
Or you can't support yourself.
But 10 minutes, you're going to be able to keep your head up.
Yeah. But just to point out that these are sort of a compromise. The PFDs that do keep your head above water are too bulky to paddle in. So they're sort of a compromise with the Coast Guard certification for the kind of water sports that we do.
Thanks for pointing out that, Steve. So that's what you're always going to have. Then the question is, what else you're going to wear? You probably need something else more than that. Well, maybe a bathing suit, right? Maybe not this one, but maybe a bathing suit. But then it's sure going to have to be warm to wear a bathing suit, right? Even a bathing suit and shorts and a PFD, if you're in the water for very long, it's not going to do you much good for very long. So in my view, that's for Hawaii, not for the San Francisco Bay. Maybe it's okay for some of you, but not for me. So then there are a lot of choices, okay? If you're not going to wear something that warm, then what might you wear? Well, you might wear a wetsuit of Farmer Jane, Farmer John. It has long legs. It's sleeveless, so you can easily move your arms around with some kind of rash guard underneath, maybe something high neck so it keeps the sun off you. That's one possibility. If that's too warm, you might want to use something that has shorter pants or not quite as heavy weight, but still something that's neoprene. Maybe a thinner, lighter neoprene top. Some women really like a top like this. It has a very lightweight neoprene, arms as well as body. Some like to wear a Farmer Jane along with maybe just a dry top, not a dry suit, just a dry top. It's a lot cheaper. It doesn't cost so much money. It will keep the water from, it makes a tight seal with the wrists, and you've got a neck gasket as well. And you can cinch it in around the waist, the hips. So that can go together if it's quite cold out, to make something that can be comfortable, maybe warm enough. The question is it going to be warm enough for you? Okay. And the only way to know that is to go out and spend a minimum of 10 minutes in the water at various temperatures. So if you put this on tomorrow and go and put just this on and your PFD and go and sit in the water for 10 minutes, that's going to tell you, am I warm enough? Could I make it another 10 minutes? How are my feet? How are my hands? Am I going to be able to work my buckles? Can I do a self-rescue after that? Only time will tell. Only experience will tell.
Sharon, I have a question from Shunrun.
Okay, go ahead.
Shunrun, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, this is Sharon. My question is, if I'm wearing a farmer drum with a rash guard on the top, then
Yes,
when I practice rolling or anything, then there will be water flush through my neck. Is
yes,
there
absolutely.
something we can reduce this condition?
Yes, so there are a couple of things you could do. If you want, you can put that, for your practice, you can put a dry top over it. Okay, it will keep the water off your torso. Okay, and if you don't come out of your boat, you'll keep your bottom dry as well. So that's one possibility. But what I used to do was I would wear a paddle jacket. So it's not, it doesn't keep the water out, but it helps to reduce the amount of water that comes in. And then, excuse me, I have to find my other piece here. And then what I would do, of course, if I'm practicing rolling, I'm always going to be wearing a helmet. Okay, always going to be wearing a helmet. And underneath, I will put on a hood. Can you see this? You see, it's very lightweight. It's very lightweight, but it makes a nice tight seal around the face, and it's down on the neck. So it really helps, and you can tuck that underneath the neck of your rash guard and just do up the Velcro. And that I found really, really makes a big, big difference.
Sorry, can you still wearing your glass with the hood?
Could you wear which glasses?
Like, regular glasses.
Yes, so this is how I would do it, is I would take my glasses off and put the hood on. And then I would take my glasses on with their secure strap around and put my glasses on, and this is light enough that you can kind of get it up and over your ears, and then put my helmet down over top of all of that. So the helmet is holding the glasses and it's on top of the hood. And that worked just fine for me.
I see. So actually the glass is on the outside of the hood, right?
That's what I do, yeah, because otherwise you have water incursion that can come in around the sides of the glasses.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, there are also other things that other hoods that you can get. The one that I've showed you, I particularly like because it's lightweight and it can easily go underneath my helmet. But there are other hoods that are warmer that you can get. There are fleece ones. There are also neoprene ones. Okay, the neoprene will have a neck on it as well. So you can try some of these or put out to Basque. Can someone lend you some so you can try different weights and see what works for you? It can get kind of expensive trying all this stuff. Another question, or should I go on? Okay, so then of course you can also go to a full length, whoopsie, dry suit. Okay, so that's going to keep you entirely dry underneath. It has the tight gaskets on the neck and on the sleeves. Personally, this is what I had to go to. I was finding that I was just getting too cold in a wetsuit, and I've gone to this. Now, this keeps you dry, but it doesn't provide much insulation. So now then you have to ask yourself, what then are you going to put underneath it? And I hope visually this little thing will help you. So I've tried various under layers. Can you see this? Can you see these three? Steve, do they show up?
Sort of, not too well. I think you're gonna have to hold them up.
How about there? Can you see just the sizes?
Yes.
So this one here, this little one, the smallest burrito is a very lightweight under layer. You can get tops and bottoms separate. I started out with this for summer, okay, underneath my dry suit. And then I started out with this one, which is a little bit bigger burrito underneath for winter. And what I found was that I was getting cold after I'd sweated. And I just was not comfortable in my dry suit after I had paddled. It would be cold, the water would be cold, the air temperature would be cold, I would be warm, I would be paddling. And then I would go in and I would just freeze because my body was kind of wet and sweaty. And that cold water would go through the dry suit and I was not comfortable. So I went to an undergarments that are called Mysterioso. I don't know if you've heard of them or not. They're a little pricey, but why it works is because it has fleece on the inside. Now, any kind of fleece overshirt might work. I don't know, I've never tried it, but it's the fleece. It doesn't allow all of this fabric to touch your skin. It keeps it just raised off it. And even though this is the biggest burrito, I find I'm comfortable in this at almost all temperatures throughout the year, except when it's particularly hot. And this will be all I wear underneath my dry suit, and I can be fine in the water even after I've sweated for quite some time. So Mysterioso, that's for me what worked. You'll have to find out what works for you. Okay, so then maybe one more question or two, and then I'd like to turn to hands and feet.
Yes.
I think Treve has a question.
Well, I had a question about the Mysterioso. I been looking for that for a year or two, and it looks like it may no longer be available. Does anybody know if there's still a vendor for that?
Clavel Sports, what's it called? Clave Sports, they were selling it.
Have you tried anything from Kokatat?
I have not, but maybe anything that is fleece on the inside could work. I don't know. I just found that it's way better than these other medium and lightweight under layers that are more generally available.
Okay,
I've
Dave.
used,
Sorry, Treve, you wanted to finish?
yeah, I guess I've used Kokatat top. They have a material that's sort of a kind of like a smart wool that I really like.
And you know, whatever works for you, that's the key, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You try out various things, but you've got to do your own tests and find out what works and what doesn't.
Okay, Dave, you had a comment or a question?
I do have a question. I believe on the Buzz, we had a discussion about what everyone is wearing underneath their dry suit. And I know Steve had a really good, inexpensive solution, and I know he's told me about it, but unfortunately, I cannot remember what Steve uses.
What Steve uses, what I posted, I think on Buzz, is it's very much like Mysterioso. It's a fleece on the inside. It's smooth on the outside. It's not fleece on the outside. So it's easy to layer and it slides. So you don't feel constrained by stuff sticking. Really stretchy. It lasts really well. I get it from Amazon. You can get the top and the bottom for about $28.
How about Steve, if you post it?
I will.
Okay, great.
I love it. It's the best stuff I found. And it's a
Can
deal.
we turn to hands and feet? How much time do we have left, Steve?
We have about 11 minutes left, unless people want to go over for a little bit.
Okay. So on hands, generally we wear some kind of protection for sun on the backs and for preventing blistering on the hands. I find a 3/4 glove without fingers is very good for much of the year. I use it for much of the year. Some people like to have a light, full fingered glove instead. I've tried them. I didn't like it all that much, but it's whatever you like. And then I think the most difficult one is what to use when it's really cold, especially if it's windy and cold. For me, I found the neoprene glove, a heavy neoprene glove, has been about all I've found that helps at all. Now, to me, the key with these gloves is that they have to be adequately flexible, that you can manipulate your your spray skirt. You've got to still be able to put it on and take it off. You need to be able to do things. You can't be incapacitated with gloves that are so rigid and thick that you can't be safe. You can't get your spray skirt off, for example, or on. One of the things I've used, and I happen to still love it, is just a kitchen glove. Okay, I bought black, so it didn't look quite as awful, but a glove, just a plastic, just a kitchen glove, it keeps the wind off. And sometimes for me, my hands stay warmer with just a kitchen glove on than they do with anything else. Pogies can be an answer, but I found them to be a bit cumbersome, but we can talk about them if you want. Socks. Well, under a dry suit, I will wear either a warm, fuzzy, like a smart wool sock that I use for hiking. I also use this called seal skins. I don't know if you can read that. Seal skins. So it has 3 layers. It has this kind of cottony, soft inner layer, and then it has like almost like a plastic layer, and then an external, much tougher layer on the outside. And I found they are wonderful when the weather is cold. And I put that on under my bootie, and I'm just a happy camper. Which brings us to boots and shoes. In warm weather, so first of all, I recommend always wearing something that has a solid toe rather than a sandal. Because when you're getting in and out of your boat or moving around, if you happen to hit a toe and do damage on a toe or a toenail out in out in the wilderness, you're really going to have a problem. So I can wear just a little, like a little slipper, something that is on gives me a little bit of padding when I'm on rocks. Otherwise, I will wear like a little bootie, neoprene bootie, which I happen to like. If the going's really tough and I need a lot of support on the bottom, then I find 5 tennies to be very nice in the water, and they're good to paddle in. But something with a closed toe is what I recommend. Okay, can we take questions now, Steve, on those?
Yeah, Eric has a question. So Eric.
Oh yeah, I had a question.
Sorry, that was Eric Olson. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I
All
forgot
right,
we have
sorry
two
about
Erics.
that. Boy, Sharon, thank you so much for all these tips. It's great. Can you just, I'm completely new to this, so can you just explain a little bit about the decision-making between dry and wet?
You're talking about dry suit versus wetsuit.
Yeah.
So there's a huge cost difference. So, I mean, unless you're going to be paddling a lot and then paddling in cold weather or wanting to really do a lot of rolling or whatever, then you're probably going to go a wetsuit because the investment is a whole lot less. And you might just layer some things over in order to give you that added warmth. So cost is a really big factor. And after that, it's really what are you comfortable paddling in? one of the things that one of the points that's made on the slide, on those slides, is that muscle, the amount of muscle that someone has on their body makes a big difference to how much heat you can generate. So a man, just because of testosterone levels and higher muscle mass, will produce more heat, use more heat in a day, use more energy in a day, produce more heat in a day than the average woman will. So men sometimes get way too hot in dry suits, and they just find they sweat too much inside them. They're uncomfortable. They're always having to dunk in order to cool off, and they're just much more comfortable in a wetsuit than in a dry suit. So again, my point is, try, don't invest in a dry suit if you don't think you're going to need it. Try other things and go in the water and see if this works for you. And if it does, and you don't mind being wet when you get off your paddle, don't invest in a dry suit.
Okay, can I just add to that? One thing is that many of us have both wetsuits and dry suits, and we wear them in different conditions. So, I think a lot of people start out buying, say, a Farmer John bottom and a paddling jacket, and then put maybe a fleece layer under the paddling jacket. But I mean, for example, when it's warm out, I don't wear my dry suit because I'm roasting in there. So I'll wear a wetsuit, and with anything from like a polypro shirt to, a shirt with a paddling jacket to maybe a thin neoprene shirt with it. And once it gets colder, I much prefer being in my dry suit because I don't like to be wet. I don't like to have my feet wet all day. I'm warmer, I'm more comfortable. So sometimes it's not one or the other. It's also different conditions and what's going to work for you. There's a question from the Danishes again. So let me get back here. Oh.
Yeah, I had a question. Last January, I was at the Basque Rescue Day at the Berkeley Marina, and I wear a number 3 Farmer John with, a few layers of tops of shirts underneath it and a neoprene jacket. And I was just freezing. And I was wondering, I don't want to get a dry suit because I get claustrophobic with that kind of tight neck, but should I be wearing would a thicker layer Farmer John help in cold weather? Or
the problem as you go up in thickness is that they get more rigid and less flexible and more difficult to move in. Okay. So it has to do with what's comfortable for you. Wearing something that's a windbreaker over top, I found it makes a huge difference.
Oh, okay.
So you might try a windbreaker, like this one that I showed you here is just the thinnest because that's all I wanted it for. Mm-hmm. But my daughter has one that's, considerably heavier, much, much warmer. So you might do something like that, and then pay attention on it to how the neck is. You want it to be able to close well. You want the sleeves to be able to close well. Mm-hmm. You may want, the waist hip area to be able to really cinch in so that when you go in the water, you're not taking very much water inside this windbreaker top. You're taking in some, but you're not getting flooded with cold water. It makes a big difference.
Okay, thank you. I will look into that.
Thank you. And one point kind of connected with that, but is don't forget about the head. We lose an awful lot of heat through our head. So wearing warm things on our head, we really can make, or not, really makes a big difference to our perception of whether the wetsuit is warm enough. Maybe if you add something more on your head, the wetsuit is going to be fine, or the dry suit's too hot. Well, then take off the thing you have on your head and make it lighter, just a hat instead of a cap instead. Okay, I'd like to go on if I can.
Can I just add one thing quick? There is also something that's halfway between, which is called a semi-dry suit, which doesn't have the tight neck, but it's fabric and you can layer up. If you go in the water, it's not going to keep you absolutely dry the way a dry suit would because your neck is not sealed. but it's also much more comfortable and doesn't have the claustrophobic feel of the latex gasket.
Yeah, good point, Steve. So I want to talk just for a minute or two about extras. So we're wanting to prevent getting too cold. That's really what we're talking about today. And some of that has to do with, are you staying warm when you're stopping for lunch? We'll paddle for a couple hours, stop and have a lunch break. The wind hits it, we start getting cold. Hands get cold, heads gets cold. Having extra things to put on when we stop for lunch can really make a difference. I like to use these half glove mittens, so you can actually get your fingers out and be able to get your lunch with them, but you can tuck your hands into them nicely and stay warm when it's cold out. An extra fleece, an extra windbreaker, a really warm hat, an extra hat. I don't know where my hat just flew off to, but it did. Those things really make a difference. So put them in a dry bag, put them in your dry bag, put them in your hat, and you've got them for extra layering when you're stopping for lunch. And then some other things that I think make a real difference to your risks of getting too cold if you take a dunking by surprise or somebody in your group does. It has to do with gear and being able to get out of the water or get out of a bad situation quickly so that the person is not, you or the other person is not in the water longer than they really need to be. A tow belt, wearing a tow belt, learning how to use it, getting lots of practice using it, I think is critical. Of course, you're going to want your paddle float because you're going to want to be able to use that when everything else fails and it's the only way for you to self-rescue, you've got your paddle float. Your roll just might not have worked then. If you're going to be paddling out when it's foggy, like it often is in the bay, you may want to have a compass so that you can find your way out of the fog if you happen to get into it. I mentioned hydration, how important it is to be hydrated. Men don't find it too difficult to pee when they're wearing a dry suit, but women, I hear, often will say, oh, I'm not going to drink water because I'm going to have to pee. Well, that's what funnels are for. Make sure you have your funnel and you know how to use it, and make sure you have your water and be sure you drink it. One of the things I do is to take a thermos of hot sugared, slightly sugared tea, 2 cups this holds, and I drink this at lunchtime. I often won't drink enough even if I have my Camelback as I'm paddling, but while I'm sitting having lunch, if I have 2 cups of fluid, that really helps a lot. So that can be good. Snacks, oranges are great, already peeled, sectioned. When you stop, you can pop a few pieces into your mouth. Sugar, fluid, electrolytes, it really helps. Those non-crumbly snacks, a first aid kit, something that's waterproof to put your phone in. So if your VHF isn't doing the trick, you've got a functioning cell phone that you can use to call for help. And why are all these things important? And why am I bringing them up in a hypothermia talk? Is because anxiety, okay? Anxiety is a killer. Anxiety saps energy. If we have this equipment and we know how to use it, we're going to go out and feel more confident. We're probably going to be more competent, and we're going to be less anxious. And that cold water shock that we get and dunking isn't going to take the toll that it might otherwise have done. Okay, that's a lot of different stuff. Do we have time for a few last questions, Steve, or should we end?
We're after 8. I'm happy to stay and talk a little bit. Sharon, I don't know if you need to rush off or you want to.
I'm fine. I can stay a bit.
So sure, if people have questions, I want to make one comment about what to wear at lunch. And in addition to the things that Sharon mentioned, one very simple thing you can do is buy an inexpensive, very large windbreaker, which you can put over, where you can keep wearing your PFD, put it on the outside so it keeps it away from your body. And also your PFD itself is a lot of insulation. It's all foam. So if you put a windbreaker over that, you get the wind off you, you slow down the evaporative cooling if you're wet, and you can move around. So I went and bought like an extra large one, just stick it on top of everything. Okay, any comments, questions, complaints?
Question,
Eric?
have you or anyone else spent minutes in the water in a semi-dry suit with a neoprene neck gasket instead of a latex neck gasket? I'm just wondering how much water actually gets in.
I have not.
I have. I did my infamous swim, I think it was the year before last, when I capsized in Yellow Bluff and my rear hatch on my boat popped off. And it was an ordeal to empty my boat, and it was extremely.
But how much water got in, Steve?
So I was in the water for 1.25 miles for over 20 minutes, drifting with the current. And you get wet, but I stayed warm. So partly because I was active, I was trying to hang on to my boat and so on. But just sort of trapping the water, even if it's it was not a dry top, it was a paddling jacket. I was wearing a Farmer John and I think a 1 millimeter, what NRS calls a hydroskin, which is a thin neoprene shirt, very flexible. And I stayed warm for the whole time, which sort of surprised me, actually.
Huh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think.
One more question, Steve.
Hey,
Heather?
Heather. Yeah, so I run fairly warm, and I'm used to living in places that are really cold. I've lived in the Midwest and the East Coast. And so my question is kind of the opposite. How little can I wear but still be safe if I do end up in the water? Because I'm paddling right now in the winter and I'm getting overheated wearing the Farmer Jane.
So I think Heather, the thing to do is to go in and sit in the cold water, go and float out in the cold, seriously, for 10 to 20 minutes and see how you feel. I mean, it really is what you have to do. I mean, okay. I started learning to roll a number of years ago, and that was the best thing I ever did. Okay, I learned to roll, but that was a bonus. But what it really did was full year round, I was in the water all the time. And it gave me so much experience at finding out what the water temperature, what I needed to be wearing for these different temperatures. So get your head wet, get your net wet, sit out there, float around in there and time yourself and see how you feel, okay? That's what you need to find out. If what you're wearing, if you're fine in the water for 20 minutes, fine, keep on wearing it. But if after 10 minutes, you really wouldn't be able to do a self-rescue, then you just need to keep dunking while you're paddling to cool off, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah, Heather, even with a dry suit on, you can cool off because the so-called durable water repellent that they put on the things lasts about 5 minutes. And after that, they will get wet on the surface, the fabric, and you get evaporative cooling. So even if you don't need to know how to roll, what you can always do is you grab the bow of somebody's boat and you dip yourself down with the water on one side, go around, do it on the other side. So you can, people do that. If you're dressed and you're really too warm for the air and you're overheating, that's one thing you can do, is just get yourself wet, and that'll cool you down for quite a while. And then you just do it again when you need to.
But what you're wearing might be just fine. Do your experiment and find out.
Okay,
and do it at different temperatures to know.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're done. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, everybody, and stay tuned for more clinics next week. It's going to be about VHF radio use. It's going to be a different format where we're going to have workshops. So because we're going to have limited number of people, because the workshops can only hold certain number of people, we're going to have signups. So that will probably get posted within the next few days. Keep an eye on it. David, you had a question.
Yeah, do you need to currently have a VHF radio for that to really be of benefit?
No, you will not. So, and if we get overbooked, then we're going to try and have additional, at least one or maybe more additional sessions if there's demand for it. So stay tuned. We're going to try to do these pretty much every week. I think we're going to skip the week when there's a general meeting. There's also going to be one coming up on reading the water and reading waves, which is always good when you're trying to get into or out of the ocean, even if you don't want to surf. So, okay. Thank you, Sharon. That was excellent.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay warm, don't get hypothermic, and don't overheat. Bye.
Bye.